Violence on the streets of Dublin once again hitting the headlines over the weekend, becoming something of a regular occurrence. So, what needs to be done to put an end to it? We are joined by the Sinn Fein TD, Louise O'Reilly, and the former Garda Sergeant, Christy Galligan. Louise, to you first. You're obviously a Dublin TD. You know the centre of the city well. What do you think is the issue, and how can we address this issue?
I think there is there is no doubt that there's a serious issue in Dublin City. I think it has got worse in the
Has it got
last.
worse? And I'm sorry to cut across you. We'll give you
Yeah,
time
no,
to answer.
and I suppose when you think about this, sometimes we tend to say, well, is it just social media? Are we just hearing it more? Is it the same as it was when I was younger in Dublin?
Yeah, like
When you were,
I can remember the Quays. When I came to Dublin first in the late 80s, you didn't go down the Quays at night. I mean, there was it was Dublin City could be hairy enough in past times as well.
Yeah, but I suppose, a couple of weeks ago, my colleague Pa Daly, along with Councillor Janice Boylan, were in town, and they did a kind of a meet and greet with traders in the O'Connell Street, Talbot Street area. And what they were saying was, yes, it's demonstrably worse because now it's having an impact on their capacity to be able to recruit. That they have, they've young workers who are worried, they're anxious about locking up at night, they're anxious about being in the shops, in the pubs, and that in the evening times, and they're particularly anxious about going home. Also, and this is something that is relatively new, is fears around people going on public transport. And I think it's important as well to say, Mark, it's not all doom and gloom. Dublin is a brilliant place, great place to live, great place to rear your kids. But what we need to do is ensure that there's visible policing in not just in the city centre, but in the urban villages as well. And it is that visible Garda presence that I think will make a huge difference. And certainly talking to the traders, and I'll be meeting with the Mandate Trade Union tomorrow to discuss the health and safety of their staff working in not just in the city centre, but also in our urban villages, and to see what they would recommend in terms of keeping their staff safe. But there's no disputing it. When you talk to the traders, they will tell you that they have seen a market increase in the
Okay.
last number of years, and also that it is now impacting on their capacity to be able to recruit.
I want to bring in former Garda Sergeant Christy Galligan. Christy, would that be your experience as well?
Yeah, I agree with everything that your speaker has said there. But if you look at the statistics in relation to assaults, etc., and in the first quarter of 2023 alone, there was 165 assaults in Dublin Central. Now, that hasn't really increased by much. The real increase was in 2022, when Gardaí recorded the highest number of assaults in Dublin. But we also know from a CSO survey in 2019 that only 29% of victims reported such incidents. So there's a huge underreporting of assaults. And we also have the issue of young juveniles, unfortunately, who are involved in serious crime, like assault causing harms as well. And we know in 2022, the GLO referrals, there's something like 15,000 referrals involving 10,000 children. And you know that the issue of crime in relation to young juveniles, there was 8% of crime was committed by juveniles under the age of 18. And it's a sad reality that it's happening in every town, and I know it gets more probably national coverage because it happens in Dublin. But we have assaults as well, assaults causing harm in towns like here in Letterkenny and Donegal. I've worked in Dublin as well, and I've seen over the last 2 decades the reduction in the number of foot patrols in Dublin city centre. You know, when you walk down Dublin city centre.
Why is that? Why is there less foot patrol? I've spoken to guards who say, well, for example, the amount of paperwork they have to do is crazy. Every time they do anything, it takes half a day on Pulse to input. Is that the problem? Is it? Why do we not have more Gardaí on the streets?
Well, the reason is the new policing model has been the biggest abject failure in the Garda Síochána at the present moment in time. The roster system that they introduced, even the roster system they're going to reintroduce, which the Westminster roster will have are 5 manned units, but there isn't sufficient uniformed members to cover those 5 manned units.
And yet we've more Gardaí than we had 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately, a lot of them now have gone into numerous specialist units that have been set up over the last 2 decades. So when you take uniformed members off the street to go into different specialist units, then you're losing manpower. You're not replacing them. Plus, you have the issue of the roster or the recruitment and retention, the number of people who are resigning from the job, people who are just then you have, it's a false premise when you look at the statistics recently of the number of guards in each division per pro rata per person in each division. That is a false premise. At any one time, you won't have that number of members on the beat. You have to understand that there is 5 units working 10-hour or 12-hour shifts, and there is a reduction in the number. If some member gets sick, you'll have members who are sick, who are on leave, who are injured on duty, and you won't have that manpower available to you at all times. I've known from experience, you won't have that. The sad reality for a lot of people is that we have a policing model and an issue between frontline staff members and senior staff members in the Garda Commissioning headquarters. There's a myriad of problems that need to be
Christy, we have your point. Former Garda Sergeant Christy Galligan, thank you indeed for talking to us. Louise, just to come back to you, the government would say they have taken action the last few weeks. They've put forward extra funding. We did see, we saw an announcement last week, I think was it 500 arrests over the previous week. They have stepped up to the plate on this, they would say.
But Mark, look at the funding. It was 10 million
Shane,
euros.
By the way, Shane Coleman,
Sorry,
not Mark
Shane,
Coleman.
My apologies.
Don't worry, you're not the first person to make the mistake. Shane. It's okay.
So, very sorry. But look at the reality. The 10 million euro that was given to purchase overtime. But if you're talking to members of An Garda Síochána, they will tell you that very many of them are burnt out already from doing overtime. The fact is we don't have enough Gardaí. And, the Minister made that announcement off the back of a very high-profile assault. But as Christy says, 29% of assaults are reported, but an awful lot of them are not reported. So, when we get this high-profile focus on Dublin City, we see a knee-jerk reaction from the government. But the reaction is to ask Gardaí, who are already working, many of them, as much overtime as they can handle, to ask them then to do more. So we actually need to increase the intake into Temple.
Easier said than done, though. They've been trying. Can't force people to go into it.
You can't. But what you can do is you can be credible in what you're offering them and say to them that you have a plan to be able to increase the amount of Gardaí who are not just in training but also coming out. So we would propose using a hybrid model where you've got half of the intake who are training on the job and the other half in Templemore, and then they swap over. And again, you're getting people into, they can't obviously do frontline policing, but they have to be supervised, but they are learning on the job. They are an additional body there and they're learning every day as they go. We also want to see the establishment of a dedicated transport policing unit, because that is something that is a very new feature in terms of people telling you what concerns them. I'm a commuter myself. I use the Northern Line very regularly. Most of the time, in fact, the vast majority of the time, it's very, very safe. But when it's not, it's very disconcerting and it puts people off using public transport and coming into town. There's an awful lot that can be done. We've had 12 years of Fine Gael ministers for justice. They have brought us to this crisis. Nobody would be foolish enough to suggest that the people who have caused this would be the ones to fix it. So, I really think we need a change of approach. I think we need a change of government.
I thought you might say that.
In truth, there is definitely a change of approach that is required, and a stick and plaster of overtime isn't going to cut it.
Louise O'Reilly, Sinn Fein TD, thank you for talking to us. And before that, former Garda Sergeant Christy Galligan.